load of half-truths, because and there isn't one point of it. And so every time I go and do more research, so a couple of years ago, the Russian people, the Russian side in Nottingham, apparently I got in touch with my cousins there just to get in touch. What had happened was that in the house that my great-grandmother came to live in with my grandmother at 4, and we've got a whole family in Amsterdam that I've been to see, when they were doing it, when the builders were redoing it, they used to have these places where you used to, in terraces, keep secret stuff, materials, usually money. But there's all these letters in some sort of code, they think, and promissory notes, and they're all from the death, but all from the Ukraine. And we're still busy getting them all translated. We don't know what this is about, because there was a big lace business going on. But seriously, quite seriously, the words, I nearly fainted on when they said this. They were sent off this stuff. Somebody, one of these, that sent them off to a Russian professor who sent them off to MI5 because they were in these codes. But on the other side, because of all this code breaking, and Rolf advised for the film, you know, on whatever it was called.
Right.
There is also MI5 on that side. And I've been down to the archives in Kew, and of course for some reason, there was a whole, reasons that I know more of now, but this is why I'm feeling now that we're on screen and that this is going to go into another website. I have still no idea how to publish this thing, because even changing the names won't hide the bits of truth. So what I'm trying to do is to write the bits of truth as I find them. And I found that, you know, the poetry gets published because people can deal with the spaces in between, but for some reason best known to myself, I'm trying to find a way to explore this sort of very painful family history that I know must be happening. So if you take all the war zones and all the difficult things where families have come in and out and had to come in and out, very hard things happen. And people don't stay the same side of political or ethical lines within family groupings. And I think that's where, for me, the material that we work with, it's the material, but it can actually be really, really sensitive. And we're probably bumping into another question now, because I know that what started me off I've just got, I mean, up there, I've just got.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's almost like it seems like we both have a wealth of things, but but they're quite different. Yours was you were sent on a kind of investigation because of gaps in information.
Yes. So all the stuff I've got is I've found.
Yeah.
So I've had to hunt down like a mad detective.
Yeah.
So we had one tablecloth that my Grammy bought from over, a sort of Russian shirt, a Kiddush cup, a book, Niet Golas, Niet de Heim, which was from Amsterdam, which is another part of the story altogether. I've seen the samovar that my great-grandma's sister brought all the way over, that is in our family history. So along the way, what I've done is I've extended, trying to research what happened, I have extended the connections of the whole family on both sides. It's almost like it's very interesting having this conversation, because I think the work is that I have got all these connections now that were possibly going to be not because of the generations that of my generation and afterwards, through the material. And maybe, I mean, I'm not quite sure what to do with this thing that I've written. everybody keeps telling me that it has to be published.
Yeah.
And I'm actually going, well, does it? Because I'm not sure what these things mean, whether the maybe the outcomes are different, so that when you're doing I've seen some of the clips, so it's how people respond, isn't it, to that reawakening of the jokes and the cabaret.
Yeah, and you know, I feel the same as you, that in that show I tell a kind of complete-ish story. You know, because it's a show that's happening live in a certain time frame, it's not, there are gaps, and there are quite clearly gaps, but there, you know, no one can kind of stop and go back and rewind and ask to see the footnote for that thing. So I'm given kind of permission in that form to tell a story the way I want to, but I'm very aware that there might be things in there that
that's
that aren't, or that, you know, you could make a whole other show out of everything that I left out, or, you know, someone else could make a completely different story. So it's funny that I think one of the things that draws me to it is searching, maybe sounds like a bit similar to you, searching for something true. And I really like in theatre that kind of juxtaposition of something real put on a stage in a place where things are kind of fake and performed. And so I'm looking for something real, and I think, like, it can't get much realer than, if you're going to tell a true story, then you kind of only really can tell your own.
Yes, and I think that's interesting about the form, because it's interesting in part in one section. If I just come back to the initial trigger, that, you know, which was the birth certificates, and so I looked up on Google Maps where my mother was born, and it was in this. It was just a sort of, in Leicester, just some. It was supposed to be a nursing home, but it was just a little, really a semi-detached. And actually, in the writing of it, I transposed actually my grandmother giving birth to my mother in here. And actually in the birth sequence, she goes back in her mind's eye through the candlewick bedspread to this escalator in Leipzig, I think it is, and the last time she left Leipzig. Can I just read it you and see whether I'll just read you one paragraph. She heard a voice screaming. She felt the wet in the centre of her belly. Putchen, putchen. A damp cloth met her forehead. The walls of the upstairs room crushed her. How could they be flattening her face? And then she was walking on Ormondstrasse, a petal from the cherry blossom on her forearm, the cord coil pulling her downwards, always inwards, past herself, fell slack for a moment. She saw behind now and ahead. Travelling upwards, she was standing on a wooden escalator in the underground. And so it goes on that what I think I'm trying to do is to find that form which transposes my imaginings. Now, I think I might just, I was talking to Pete Calu at Common Word about rewriting the whole thing. As you can see from the tabs here, this is the number of times it moves from, so there's Chemnitz, Leipzig, Łódź, Nottingham, all sorts of different places, and there's about 3 or 4 time zones. And I'm expecting my reader to move about at breakneck speed across all, which is, in terms of often Jewish diaspora histories, is exactly what we've got.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think I wanted something smooth, like a sort of George Eliot narrative arc. But I just don't think that a reader can be expected to keep up with it.
It makes me think again of my grandma. She was quite resistant to writing an autobiography, but she was persuaded in the end to do a kind of interview one. So she spoke in the interview, and then it was transcribed, and then it was edited. And what they did with that is they actually put the year that's being spoken about in the margin, like sideways in the margin, in the copy that they published. I don't know, it just reminded me of that, like maybe there's just something inevitable about that going back and forwards in time.
I mean, the way that I've done it, I think maybe I just need to put some more hard work into it, is to sprinkle the whole thing with imaginary figures. So when my sister and I went off to, it's hard to get all the places right, to Leipzig, we went to the Stasi Museum. And I'll tell you one story. There was this gorgeous blue vase that used to be on the windowsill, which my mum sold eventually. It was beautiful blue glass, and I used to take it out of this beautiful tin and unwrap it and look at it and gaze at it as a child. I wasn't supposed to. And the story was that that was the only thing that my mother's grandmother, who was the only surviving person in Chemnitz, who nobody would talk about, verboten. But apparently she'd sent some things for the wedding, for my mum and dad's wedding, and it was the only thing that survived the crossing. And my mum always said, well, the things, they just didn't make it. The crossing just got bashed about, and this one thing survived. So I never thought about this as anything other than, oh, fine. And then, but we go to the Stasi Museum in Leipzig, and because I'm me, we find the archivist. We find him there, and we go and have a meeting with him. And it turns out, he said, oh, and we talked about our background and the code breaking thing. And he said, oh, well, and he took us into the back tunnels of all this stuff that they've got. And he said, oh, well, there would have been eyes on you and your family in England. I said, what? And he said, well, yeah. He said, come and have a look at this. And it was rooms and rooms of like chests that they've still got, according to the law, because they're not allowed to throw it away, of broken stuff that apparently, when people were sending things to England in the 50s and early 60s, they would get hold of the stuff and just smash it all up to see if there was any codes. And I was moving back to this chest, like there was a hole, and I was going, and he said, well, in all likelihood, that's the only thing that survived the smash up. And maybe, maybe somebody, it was such a beautiful thing that maybe somebody couldn't, or just left that one thing. And of course, it's all because Eastern Europe has opened up. So none of this was available till quite recently.
Yeah.
And so I don't know whether you're finding that the context of where your material sits, is that complicated for you now, or?
Well, we have a similar-ish story because the flat that my mum and my grandparents lived in was bugged, and so we knew that there had been a lot of surveillance on the family, which led to eventually my granddad being imprisoned. And when I started making the show, we did a scratch half an hour of it, and afterwards I asked my mum if I thought maybe we could get the transcripts. Maybe they had transcripts of what they had been listening to, what they'd bugged in the flat. And I asked her if she'd be open to asking it's called the Institute of Public Remembrance or something in Bratislava, which is the kind of equivalent of the Stasi Museum, keeps all the files that and if you're related to someone who had files kept on them, then you have the right to go and access those files. And they had never done it, partly because my mum and grandma, they didn't want to really know who had been informing on them. because they knew that it was probably a bunch of their friends as well as people who weren't their friends, and they just weren't interested in sort of digging up the past in that way. But my mum said, if as long as it wasn't that kind of information, then she would be up for it. And we had a really strange experience where she remembered that someone who had made a documentary about a friend of the family's had been in touch with her about these files. And so my mum dropped her an email, and this was 2 years before that the documentary maker had been in touch. And my mum sent her an email, and she replied within half an hour and said, "I'm so happy you emailed. I've kept these documents that I was given. I was hoping that you'd ask for them." And she immediately attached interview transcripts with everyone who was interviewed by the police about my grandparents. And then she said, "This is the man at the institute to get in touch with." So we sent him an email as well. And he replied the same day and said, "As it happens, I've just spent the last year digitizing your father, my grandfather's file, because most files were destroyed. And for some reason, my granddad's wasn't. So it's one of the few sort of completely intact, something like 3,500 pages on him." So yeah, we had a very strange experience with our kind of equivalent as well. And when we went there, we found out that he kind of talked us through it, and he explained that actually the original target of surveillance had been my grandma, not my granddad, who ended up in prison. So we discovered, all these strange things, and we discovered that there had been a bug not just in the flat, which they knew about, but also in their kind of summer cottage hut in the mountains, which had no kind of running water, and they had no idea. They thought they were safe there. So there has been this kind of, I don't think this was an answer to your question at all, but there's been a kind of shift, because now I feel strange that I know things that my grandma didn't know about her own life, which is very odd.
Well, there is that sort of thing multiplied over across particularly one side, but also on the other side. And I think really what it comes down to is the sensitivity to, on the one hand, there's the, once you have the information, what responsibilities do you have with it, and how that gets passed on or not. But I think for me, the question I'd have is, since you had this experience, is as an artist, do you think it's sort of changing your way of working? Because this is what I came to when I'd assembled all this, and I'd been doing some other work, which I could see why I got into this. But it has changed my perceptions of, nice stories or neat stories. And I mean, I was a poet originally, but I find this whole thing about, somebody said to me, well, I was talking, they actually it was the wrong publisher for it. And because, they asked me this question, and they said, so does it sit in the fiction or non-fiction? And is it history or is it this? And I said, well, it's a new form of docudrama. It's not the stuff you get on television, but that's what it is.
Yeah.
All these things which they say that it's mixed. And I'm wondering whether the way that you're approaching your work is really that's one of the reasons you've chosen this particular. There's a lightness to it as well, and a very focused, with all with all that sort of, there's a honing point, isn't there?
Yeah.
That I like, because in a way it allows you to sort of be in that space where you've got that knowledge, but also develop something around the original material without maybe being too
yeah, too precious. Don't have to be. I think that the fact that what my granddad made, he also wrote cabarets and created entertainment for people. It wasn't serious, and he loved jokes, and it was about entertainment and laughter and fun. That meant that when I was making it, I always felt like he would also want me to make something light and fun as well.
Yeah.